Alright, guys, so getting back to some normalcy. Hopefully, I'm hoping here. When I first saw Bug from 2006 or 7, I've seen both the years. I'm gonna go with 2006 because it's usually the earliest year. When I first saw this movie, it was around when it came out, and I had no idea it was William Friedkin, the director of The Exorcist and The French Connection. I had no idea this was a William Friedkin movie. And I loved it from that first watch. Now we have Ashley Judd in here, who I think is a great actress, and I think this might be one of my favorite performances from her. Same with Michael Shannon, who's a great actor. He's been in a lot of things. But this movie, man, I mean, it's intense. And for those who haven't seen it, this is like a very well-made film dealing with paranoia and delusions, and even group delusion, how you can draw somebody else into your delusional way of thinking, conspiracy theories, whether they're actually going on. Like, there's a lot of layers to this movie. And since this is the first discussion I've been able to get out in a bit, you know how that goes. It's going to be long as fuck, so you better get popcorn ready or something. But for a synopsis, we have Agnes, played by Ashley Judd, who lives in this seedy motel. She had her son abducted. I think it's like a decade prior or something like that. A long while. The son's been missing now. Never found out who was responsible for taking him, what happened to him. So she's living this kind of real depressed and isolated life in this motel. And Michael Shannon's character, Peter, ends up showing up. And the two of them end up forming a bond. But then Peter starts noticing that there are bugs in the motel room, aphids specifically. And at first we don't know if he's really seeing these bugs and if they actually exist, or if he's just a crazy person. Now there's a few, that's all you need to know going into this movie. Now, if you haven't seen it, you don't want spoilers, but there's basically three ways that I've always looked at this movie. Either the conspiracy, and we'll get all into that, is real, that Peter is freaking out about, and they are implanting bugs inside of him, like egg sacs, to control people, and all the government conspiracy in this movie that Peter goes on to get increasingly more unhinged as he talks about it. It's either all real, it's either all in their heads, starting from Peter, because we see the doctor of Peter later on, and he ends up stabbing him, killing this guy, and then just says it's a robot sent by the government. So he's either completely off the rails, and everything that the doctor says to Agnes in that scene is the truth, and that Peter is just a schizoid, or whatever his diagnosis is. He has delusions, he's paranoid, severely schizophrenic, or something like that. And Agnes was so vulnerable in her mind state and in the way that she's been living all these years with her abusive husband or ex-husband. Forget if they're still married or not or whatever. But he's a douchebag too. She had her son abducted, so Peter came into her life like right at the perfect time that she would fall into all this government conspiracy delusion that Peter's under. So there's either those two options, and then there's a theory that I've always read about since I remember seeing this movie, is that they're both on drugs, that they're both like meth heads, and they're methed out beyond belief throughout this whole movie, because there are references to stuff like that. I remember there's a scene that Peter mentions bugs that are in cocaine that they used in the purification process, and coke bugs. You never heard of that, she says to Agnes. So they mention that. And then there's also like a pipe laying around in the hotel room. So there are little vague hints, and some of them aren't even too vague, they're right there, to maybe imply that these are just two people that are getting high beyond belief in this motel room, and they're just letting these delusions get to them. So we're going to try to figure out which one of those is the most likely as we rewatch this movie. So let's talk Bug from William Friedkin from 2006. That's right. So then Agnes works at a dyke bar. Is that like not correct anymore? I don't know. I've always thought that was a very empowering word. It's a strong word, dyke. I feel like if I was a lesbian woman, I would want to be referred to as a dyke. Again, I don't know if that's politically correct now, but she works at a lesbian bar, and she has her friend, I forget who plays her, but the blonde, and she's the one who ends up introducing Peter, Michael Shannon's character, to Agnes. And yeah, you see them flat out blowing lines of coke and everything here. Not Peter's character, but the two women. So we already see drug abuse and alcoholism and stuff like that throughout the whole first 15 minutes of this movie, which again makes Agnes's character very susceptible to the delusions, possible delusions, I should say, that Peter's going to be throwing her way as curveballs real soon. So in summation, just for the first 15 minutes of this movie, Friedkin really was able to capture a really creepy and eerie atmosphere that builds off of everything we find out revolving around Agnes's life. We see how much of a mess she is still from her son being abducted 10 years prior. We see the phone that rings, and even just hearing the sound of the phone ringing when she either answers it or lets it ring. That adds to the eeriness also. Nobody likes hearing a phone ring on end and not put a stop to that sound. It's very annoying. It's very uneasy. So that adds to it. And we just see all the fear that she lives in and that she lives with, and all the guilt that she lives in, that she doesn't know what happened to her son. She was almost murdered by her ex-husband, who is now out on parole, and that's when the phone calls started, is after he got paroled, is when she started getting these weird phone calls. So it really puts you into her situation and her mind state so well that it makes you not have to stretch your mind too much to see how Peter's delusions about the bugs and the government conspiracy, very plausible that her mind is so susceptible to that he'd be able to spread, almost like the bugs that he talks about themselves, spread and contaminate her mind with those delusions that he has. They do such a good job in this movie. Like, I always praise The Thing for being one of the best films dealing with paranoia. This is another one. Like, this is one of the best movies that I've ever seen that deals with paranoia and delusion. I mean, it's Friedkin. So, I mean, that alone, his directing style in this, really adds to it also, because this is a play, if I recall correctly. And it makes perfect sense. It feels like a play. And kind of like Hard Candy with Ellen Page and why can't I think of his name? It's my mom's birthday today. Thanks, everybody, for the happy birthdays to her. So we're all hitting it fucking hard. Patrick Wilson, finally, but it'll seem like 2 seconds after the edit. So it feels like a play. And, I mean, just, it really hangs a lot on the performances to have a successful film like this. Like a bottleneck movie that's set in pretty much one location and is all about the mind states and the communication between the main characters. And luckily, I mean, like I said, this is probably one of my favorite performances from Ashley Judd, and the same with Michael Shannon. And this is also like a love story between them. This isn't really a horror film to me. This is another movie that falls into, like, is it a horror or is it a psychological thriller? I would go with that. I'd say this is more of a psychological thriller or even a dual character study / thriller. It's not really a horror film, but it doesn't matter what genre it belongs in. This movie is fantastic. But then we get like the first scene with Peter and Agnes alone together, and they start to break the ice a bit, and the dialogue's great. I like when he says, I don't want to sleep with you, and she says, oh, well, don't try to butter me up or nothing. Like, all of that feels really organic. And let me make a note here of how Peter's behaving right now compared to later in the movie. He's very reserved here. He's very shy. He's very awkward. Now, it comes up later in the movie that he, escaped from an asylum or a mental hospital of some sort, and that he was on medication for his delusions. This makes me think that that's a big possibility, that all the conspiracy stuff, that might be the actual meaning behind this movie, even though I think that it doesn't matter whichever way you choose to interpret this film, because the ending could have been better. Like, I'll say that right up front. I never really liked the ending to this movie. It's very, very ambiguous, but not in a good way, in an almost like, all right, well, then what the fuck did I just watch type way. But we'll get there. But the fact that he's acting very, very almost sedated in a way compared to how we see him as the story progresses, like his medication is wearing off and it's starting to get the delusions to go worse and worse in his mind. So that makes a lot of sense if you look at this movie through the lens of he's just a mentally ill person who has these government conspiracies in his mind, and he was able to spread them to Agnes. Because even the friend, RC, the lesbian friend of Agnes, she comes back later on and she says there are no bugs. Like, I don't see anything. So she's the third party here that isn't, susceptible to these delusions. Maybe because she hasn't been through all the trauma and stuff and the guilt and the fear that Agnes has been through, which makes her more susceptible to believing all of this. She doesn't see anything. And then Agnes ends up telling her, then get the hell out of here. You're trying to take the only good thing away from me. It's how quickly she latches onto Peter, and vice versa. It's a very good film about codependency also. And actually, that's a good way to segue into a little tangent on mental illness. Obviously, Agnes in this film has numerous vices, addictive tendencies. I mean, we're all not perfect. We all have our vices in life. Now, she's obviously very depressed, and very lonely, very isolated. With Michael Shannon's character, he's more on the more extreme side of him having these delusions of bugs, that their egg sacs are laid into his teeth, and he's in that gnarly scene later when he takes the pliers and starts ripping his tooth out. That is filmed so well. That is such a disturbing sequence. And the way that they show, like I just said, how quickly Agnes latches on to Peter like he's the only thing that she has, that's really displayed beautifully here. Because as someone who, I've been open about this, who struggles with depression and anxiety for most of my life, that's part of the reason there's been a delay in content the last 2 weeks and stuff. It's just flare up in depression. It happens. And everybody has their own shit that we deal with, and we all have our ways of getting through it. So if anybody out there is struggling in any way, know that you can always reach out, either to a friend you trust, or if you're a friend of mine, reach out to me. Anybody who's hurting in any way, don't think that you're alone, is the point I'm trying to make here. But this is a very effective film on mental illness as a whole, for all the reasons I've touched on already. And we're only about half hour into this movie. We've yet to get to the insane parts of this film. So, now I don't want to speak too soon unless I'm forgetting, but I'm pretty goddamn sure we never see a bug in this entire film. Right? we never see any of these supposed aphids. And that's the brilliance of it, is that Friedkin did it that way. They could have thrown in some like hallucinatory sequences or like perspectives from their character's point of view and seen an actual bug to make us, teeter on, is this reality or not? He didn't do that. We don't see a bug throughout this entire film. Even when he has it like on his finger and under a microscope and he's saying, see it, you see it? And then she says, oh my God, like I see it. There's nothing there. And that's just another thing they do brilliantly in this film. And again, the sound design in this movie is just excellent. I've never watched this movie with headphones on. It's not streaming anywhere, so I'm watching it on the laptop. So this is the first time I'm hearing like the sound design with headphones. It's really, really good. Like when they're in the hotel after their little walk that they took in their first little bonding moments, and then they hear the chirping sound, and at first they think it's a cricket, but it ends up being the smoke alarm. It really like puts you in that hotel room with them. We get a very well acted, disturbing scene when we have Jerry, right, the dickhead ex-husband, shows up and gets in a confrontation with Agnes, slaps her, and then has the balls to say whose fault it is you got slapped and make her say hers. All that shit you just want to kick the shit out of this guy for. But very well acted. And then we have the scene where Peter and Agnes make love. And to play into the conspiracy later on, as Peter's character goes on to keep elaborating on this government conspiracy, supposedly, what is it, that when Lloyd, the son of Agnes, was kidnapped 10 years ago, they kidnapped him, the government, in order to control her and be able to infect her with like the mother aphid or the queen. And he was the carrier for the king. And so when they have sex here, it's like the bugs, replicating. Did I get all that right? Is that like the conspiracy that he goes on to say later? Because I know they directly mention, like, I'm the queen and you're the king or whatever, and we were supposed to, this was all meant to be, the conspiracy with the government was supposed to set us up on the same path to finding each other to replicate these bugs, and that's why they douse themselves on fire at the end. It's hard to talk about this movie really in detail as it goes on because it's just a lot of dialogue, but it's so engaging and it's so spot on, and the performances I can't praise enough. Even the small roles that we get from Harry Connick Jr. and the girl who plays RC, the friend. After that whole scene where RC says that I took Agnes to the doctor, to a dermatologist, and all the marks on her seem self-inflicted, or possibly that Peter did it to her, and all the arguing back and forth, and then him asking Agnes like flat out, like, do we have bugs, like yes or no, and she's not committing to a yes or no, and he starts saying the sign outside says either vacancy or no vacancy, do we have bugs or not? All of that is so well acted, like it's perfect. And they have fly paper up like throughout the motel and shit. And then later on, this must have been hard to film, when they have the tin foil and the aluminum foil all over the motel to like block the signal from the government and stuff from this conspiracy. That had to have been a real pain to shoot with. It's like shooting with mirrors everywhere. Like you're going to be reflecting light. You're going to be seeing crew members and stuff. Like that probably was a real pain in the ass. Yeah, man, the scene when he takes the pliers and starts ripping his tooth out to get to the egg sac they planted inside it, because when he was in the military hospital, he said that he had a filling done on that tooth, and the evil bastards, they put an egg sac in his tooth. When he's ripping that tooth out and she's screaming and stuff, really, really disturbing. And then we do see like a tiny little shot of bugs but I don't think it's meant to be like what they're seeing, because you see him put his tooth under the microscope, and it's her son's microscope, right? It's a toy microscope. It's not like a professional or any like good grade microscope. It's like a little kid's toy. And she ends up looking and she says, it's millions. Then heavy metal music starts blasting and shit. And then you see a quick second of like animated bugs like spreading. So it's not what they're seeing. It's just like a stylistic choice. So I stand by my point that we don't ever see a single bug in this movie. So then we get the scene when Dr. Sweet, the doctor, or whatever way you want to view this movie, if he really is doctor or not, of Peter, who comes in and starts talking to Agnes. And this is when he starts dropping all the information that Peter is delusional, paranoid, schizophrenic, that he sees things. Seeing bugs is a very common delusion for people with his illness. And then he asks if he could take a hit off of her pipe. Now again, going back to the drug angle with this movie, I'm guessing it's just pot. Because when have you ever seen a doctor, I mean, and this is a liberal doctor in 2006 as it is, to come in and just say, can I take a hit of this pipe if it's marijuana? I can't picture this doctor coming in here and taking a hit off a meth pipe or something like that. And it would take away from the great little twist that we get when Peter ends up stabbing this guy, his doctor, after Dr. Sweet was telling Agnes, I can help you find your son. Now, why would he say this? Why would he use Lloyd's, abduction against her to try to just save his own patient, I guess? I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense, but it does sort of make sense in Peter's delusional way of thinking that he was sent in there by the government. Because why resort to bringing up this woman's trauma? You're a doctor. Doesn't he understand how traumatic that shit is, and to play with her mind like that? So that's where it really blurs the lines of reality there. And I'm not sure what to think with the whole doctor coming into the motel. But he ends up getting stabbed and murdered by Peter. And great how he just adds into the delusion. And I wish I could put a clip in, but it seems like every time I do that, there's some type of issue. But the last 20 minutes of this movie, with the dialogue between Ashley Judd and Michael Shannon, is just splendid. And the way they keep building off one another, and the delusion that he lays out and says, okay, so then that's why they kidnapped Lloyd, so they can get to you. Then what else do you know? And then she starts spitting out more. The way they build off of each other is just fantastic. And it makes the ending even more impactful and more confusing. Because then we see the two of them, after realizing that they both were meant to meet at some point. And mate, and that would mate the mama bug with the papa bug, and would replicate a whole bunch of bugs. And that's how they control the population, the government. Something to that effect. I mean, even the delusions are kind of out there. So they end up dousing themselves with gasoline and lighting themselves on fire. And then it ends. But then we get a brief little scene, very, very brief, where we see the motel and we see some of Lloyd's toys. And they're not damaged by fire. There's no aluminum foil anywhere. So that leads me to think they never set themselves on fire. So then how much of this movie really happened? I don't know. I really don't. After this rewatch, I like to think that it's just a tale on how someone so down on their luck and with terrible things that's happened to them in their lives and the guilt that they're living with, that these type of delusions and irrational fears and thoughts could be implemented and planted in them so easily, like a virus, like a bug. That's pretty much how I have to take this, because it doesn't really give you any type of answer at the end of this movie. But that's Bug from 2006, William Friedkin. Excellent, excellent movie that I never hear talked about, really. I know Keith over at Agoraphobe did a watch party for this, like, last year or something, and that was the first time that I've ever seen Bug talked about, like, on YouTube in a very, very long while. So this was a great rewatch, and let me know in the comments what you guys think. If this is just a straight up tale of a delusional, mentally ill person who spreads his delusions to Agnes, or if there really is a government conspiracy here and that Peter's correct on all of that, or if they're just all meth heads. But alright, everybody, that was fun. I will talk to everybody soon, have a video up whenever I can, and hope everyone's having a good morning, afternoon, or night. Take care, guys.